14.2. The Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Republican Party. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to explain the political ramifications of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Describe the founding of the Republican Party.
In the early 1850s, the United States sectional crisis had abated somewhat, cooled by the Compromise of 1850 and the nation's general prosperity. In 1852, voters went to the polls in a presidential contest between Whig candidate Winfield Scott and Democratic candidate Franklin Pierce. Both men endorsed the Compromise of 1850. Though it was considered unseemly to hit the campaign trail, Scott did so, much to the benefit of Pierce, as Scott's speeches focused on 40-year-old battles during the War of 1812 and the weather. In New York, Scott, known as Old Fuss and Feathers, talked about a thunderstorm that did not occur and greatly confused the crowd. In Ohio, a cannon firing to herald Scott's arrival killed a spectator. Pierce was a supporter of the Young America movement of the Democratic Party, which enthusiastically anticipated extending democracy around the world and annexing additional territory for the United States. Pierce did not take a stance on the slavery issue, helped by Scott's blunders and the fact that he had played no role in the bruising political battles of the past 5 years. Pierce won the election. The brief period of tranquility between the North and South did not last long, however. It came to an end in 1854 with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This act led to the formation of a new political party, the Republican Party, that committed itself to ending the further expansion of slavery. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. The relative calm over the sectional issue was broken in 1854 over the issue of slavery in the territory of Kansas. Pressure had been building among Northerners to organize the territory west of Missouri and Iowa, which had been admitted to the Union as a free state in 1846. This pressure came primarily from Northern farmers, who wanted the federal government to survey the land and put it up for sale. Promoters of a transcontinental railroad were also pushing for this westward expansion. Southerners, however, had long opposed the Wilmot Proviso's stipulation that slavery should not expand into the West. By the 1850s, many in the South were also growing resentful of the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which established the 36 degrees 30 minutes parallel as the geographical boundary of slavery on the north-south axis. Pro-slavery Southerners now contended that popular sovereignty should apply to all territories, not just Utah and New Mexico. They argued for the right to bring their enslaved property wherever they chose. Attitudes towards slavery in the 1850s were represented by a variety of regional factions. For 3 decades, the abolitionists remained a minority, but they had a significant effect on American society by bringing the evils of slavery into the public consciousness. In 1840, the Liberty Party was the first political organization to campaign for abolition. This group sought to work within the existing political system, a strategy Garrison and others rejected. Meanwhile, the Free Soil Party committed itself to ensuring that white laborers would find work in newly acquired territories and not have to compete with unpaid enslaved people. By the 1850s, some abolitionists advocated the use of violence against slaveholders. It is important to note that, even among those who opposed the expansion of slavery in the West, very different attitudes toward slavery existed. Some anti-slavery Northerners wanted the West to be the best country for poor white people to go and seek opportunity. They did not want white workers to have to compete with slave labor, a contest that they believed demeaned white labor. Radical abolitionists, in contrast, envisioned the end of all slavery and a society of equality between black and white people. Others opposed slavery in principle, but believed that the best approach was colonization. That is, settling freed enslaved people in a colony in Africa. The growing political movement to address the issue of slavery stiffened the resolve of Southern slaveholders to defend themselves and their society at all costs. Prohibiting slavery's expansion, they argued, ran counter to basic American property rights. As abolitionists fanned the flames of anti-slavery sentiment, Southerners solidified their defense of their enormous investment in human chattel. Across the country, people of all political stripes worried that the nation's arguments would cause irreparable rifts in the country. As these different factions were agitating for the settlement of Kansas and Nebraska, leaders of the Democratic Party in 1853 and 1854 sought to bind their party together in the aftermath of intra-party fights over the distribution of patronage jobs. Illinois Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas believed he had found a solution, the Kansas-Nebraska bill, that would promote party unity and also satisfy his colleagues from the South, who detested the Missouri Compromise line. In January 1854, Douglas introduced the bill. The act created two territories, Kansas directly west of Missouri and Nebraska west of Iowa. The act also applied the principle of popular sovereignty, dictating that the people of these territories would decide for themselves whether to adopt slavery. In a concession crucial to many Southerners, the proposed bill would also repeal the 36-degree 30 minutes line from the Missouri Compromise. Douglas hoped his bill would increase his political capital and provide a step forward on his quest for the presidency. Douglas also wanted the territory organized in hopes of placing the eastern terminus of a transcontinental railroad in Chicago, rather than St. Louis or New Orleans. After heated debates, Congress narrowly passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. In the House of Representatives, the bill passed by a mere 3 votes, 113 to 110. This move had major political consequences. The Democrats divided along sectional lines as a result of the bill, and the Whig Party, in decline in the early 1850s, found its political power slipping further. Most important, the Kansas-Nebraska Act gave rise to the Republican Party, a new political party that attracted Northern Whigs, Democrats who shunned the Kansas-Nebraska Act, members of the Free Soil Party, and assorted abolitionists. Indeed, with the formation of the Republican Party, the Free Soil Party ceased to exist. The new Republican Party pledged itself to preventing the spread of slavery into the territories and railed against the slave power, infuriating the South. As a result, the party became a solidly Northern political organization. As never before, the U.S. political system was polarized along sectional fault lines. Bleeding Kansas. In 1855 and 1856, pro- and anti-slavery activists flooded Kansas with the intention of influencing the popular sovereignty rule of the territories. Pro-slavery Missourians who crossed the border to vote in Kansas became known as border ruffians. These gained the advantage by winning the territorial elections, most likely through voter fraud and illegal vote counting. By some estimates, up to 60% of the votes cast in Kansas were fraudulent. Once in power, the pro-slavery legislature, meeting at Lecompton, Kansas, drafted a pro-slavery constitution known as the Lecompton Constitution. It was supported by President Buchanan, but opposed by Democratic Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois. The majority in Kansas, however, were Free Soilers who seethed at the border ruffians' co-opting of the democratic process. Many had come from New England to ensure a numerical advantage over the border ruffians. The New England Emigrant Aid Society, a northern anti-slavery group, helped fund these efforts to halt the expansion of slavery into Kansas and beyond. In 1856, clashes between anti-slavery Free Soilers and border ruffians came to a head in Lawrence, Kansas. The town had been founded by the New England Emigrant Aid Society, which funded anti-slavery settlement in the territory and were determined that Kansas should be a free soil state. Pro-slavery immigrants from Missouri were equally determined that no abolitionist tyrants or Negro thieves would control the territory. In the spring of 1856, several of Lawrence's leading anti-slavery citizens were indicted for treason, and Federal Marshal Israel Donaldson called for a posse to help make arrests. He did not have trouble finding volunteers from Missouri. When the posse, which included Douglas County Sheriff Samuel Jones, arrived outside Lawrence, the anti-slavery town's Committee of Safety agreed on a policy of non-resistance. Most of those who were indicted fled. Donaldson arrested 2 men without incident and dismissed the posse. However, Jones, who had been shot during an earlier confrontation in the town, did not leave. On May 21st, falsely claiming that he had a court order to do so, Jones took command of the posse and rode into town armed with rifles, revolvers, cutlasses, and Bowie knives. At the head of the procession, 2 flags flew, an American flag and a flag with a crouching tiger. Other banners followed, bearing the words Southern Rights and the superiority of the white race. In the rear were 5 artillery pieces, which were dragged to the center of town. The posse smashed the presses of the 2 newspapers, Herald of Freedom and the Kansas Free State, and burned down the deserted Free State Hotel. When the posse finally left, Lawrence residents found themselves unharmed but terrified. The next morning, a man named John Brown and his sons, who were on their way to provide Lawrence with reinforcements, heard the news of the attack. Brown, a strict, God-fearing Calvinist and staunch abolitionist, once remarked that God had raised him up on purpose to break the jaws of the wicked. Disappointed that the citizens of Lawrence did not resist the slave hounds of Missouri, Brown opted not to go to Lawrence, but to the homes of pro-slavery settlers near Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas. The group of 7, including Brown's 4 sons, arrived on May 24, 1856, and announced they were the Northern Army that had come to serve justice. They burst into the cabin of pro-slavery Tennessean James Doyle and marched him and 2 of his sons off, sparing the youngest at the desperate request of Doyle's wife, Mahala. 100 yards down the road, Owen and Salmon Brown hacked their captives to death with broadswords, and John Brown shot a bullet into Doyle's forehead. Before the night was done, the Browns visited 2 more cabins and brutally executed 2 other pro-slavery settlers. None of those executed enslaved any people or had had anything to do with the raid on Lawrence. Brown's actions precipitated a new wave of violence. All told, the guerrilla warfare between pro-slavery, border ruffians, and anti-slavery forces, which would continue and even escalate during the Civil War, resulted in over 150 deaths and significant property loss. The events in Kansas served as an extreme reply to Douglas's proposition of popular sovereignty. As the violent clashes increased, Kansas became known as Bleeding Kansas. Anti-slavery advocates' use of force carved out a new direction for some who opposed slavery. Distancing themselves from William Lloyd Garrison and other pacifists, Brown and fellow abolitionists believed the time had come to fight slavery with violence. The violent hostilities associated with Bleeding Kansas were not limited to Kansas itself. It was the controversy over Kansas that prompted the caning of Charles Sumner, introduced at the beginning of this chapter with the political cartoon Southern Chivalry, Argument versus Clubs. Note the title of the cartoon. It lampoons the Southern ideal of chivalry, the code of behavior that Preston Brooks believed he was following in his attack on Sumner. In Sumner's Crime Against Kansas speech, he went much further than politics, filling his verbal attack with allusions to sexuality by singling out fellow Senator Andrew Butler from South Carolina, a zealous supporter of slavery and Brooks's uncle. Sumner insulted Butler by comparing slavery to prostitution, declaring,
"Of course, Butler has chosen a mistress to whom he has made his vows, and who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him. Though polluted in the sight of the world, is chaste in his sight. I mean the harlot slavery."
Because Butler was aged, it was his nephew, Brooks, who sought satisfaction for Sumner's attack on his family and Southern honor. Brooks did not challenge Sumner to a duel. By choosing to beat him with a cane instead, he made it clear that he did not consider Sumner a gentleman. Many in the South rejoiced over Brooks's defense of slavery, Southern society, and family honor, sending him hundreds of canes to replace the one he had broken, assaulting Sumner. The attack by Brooks left Sumner incapacitated physically and mentally for a long period of time. Despite his injuries, the people of Massachusetts re-elected him.
Defining American. The Lecompton Constitution. Kansas was home to no fewer than 4 state constitutions in its early years. Its first constitution, the Topeka Constitution, would have made Kansas a free soil state. A pro-slavery legislature, however, created the 1857 Lecompton Constitution to enshrine the institution of slavery in the new Kansas-Nebraska territories. In January 1858, Kansas voters defeated the proposed Lecompton Constitution, excerpted below, with an overwhelming margin of 10,226 to 138. Article 7. Slavery. Section 1. The right of property is before and higher than any constitutional sanction, and the right of the owner of a slave to such slave and its increase is the same and as inviolable as the right of the owner of any property whatever. Section 2. The legislature shall have no power to pass laws for the emancipation of slaves without the consent of the owners, or without paying the owners previous to their emancipation a full equivalent in money for the slaves so emancipated. They shall have no power to prevent immigrants to the state from bringing with them such persons as are deemed slaves by the laws of any one of the United States or territories, so long as any person of the same age or description shall be continued in slavery by the laws of this state, provided that such person or slave be the bona fide property of such immigrants. How are slaves defined in the 1857 Kansas Constitution? How does this Constitution safeguard the rights of slaveholders?
The presidential election of 1856. The electoral contest in 1856 took place in a transformed political landscape. A third political party appeared, the Anti-Immigrant American Party, a formerly secretive organization with the nickname the Know Nothing Party, because its members denied knowing anything about it. By 1856, the American or Know Nothing Party had evolved into a national force committed to halting further immigration. Its members were especially opposed to the immigration of Irish Catholics, whose loyalty to the Pope, they believed, precluded their loyalty to the United States. On the West Coast, they opposed the entry of immigrant laborers from China who were thought to be too foreign to ever assimilate into a white America. The election also featured the new Republican Party, which offered John C. Fremont as its candidate. Republicans accused the Democrats of trying to nationalize slavery through the use of popular sovereignty in the West, a view captured in the 1856 political cartoon Forcing Slavery Down the Throat of a Free Soiler. The cartoon features the image of a free soiler settler tied to the Democratic Party platform, while Senator Douglas, author of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and President Pierce force an enslaved person down his throat. Note that the enslaved person cries out, "Murder! Help! Neighbors, help! Oh, my poor wife and children," a reference to the abolitionists' argument that slavery destroyed families. The Democrats offered James Buchanan as their candidate. Buchanan did not take a stand on either side of the issue of slavery. Rather, he attempted to please both sides. His qualification, in the minds of many, was that he was out of the country when the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. In the above political cartoon, Buchanan, along with Democratic Senator Lewis Cass, holds down the free soil advocate. Buchanan won the election, but Fremont garnered more than 33% of the popular vote, an impressive return for a new party. The Whigs had ceased to exist and had been replaced by the Republican Party. Know Nothings also transferred their allegiance to the Republicans because the new party also took an anti-immigrant stance, a move that further boosted the new party's standing. The Democrats courted the Catholic immigrant vote. The Republican Party was a thoroughly Northern party. No Southern delegate voted for Fremont.